I'm delighted to welcome here Audrey Scozzarro Ferrazzini, Vice President of Government Affairs at Qualcomm. Audrey, welcome to Predictions 2025 and beyond.
Thanks, Geoff, for having me. Very happy to be with you today.
We're very pleased to have you here. We've got a huge amount to talk about, a lot. I think when we were thinking about this, and obviously we've spoken to your colleague Wasim in recent years as part of Predictions, if we'd sat down 5 years ago to talk about technology regulation, it would have been a short conversation in the sense that there really wasn't anything. Yeah. That has changed dramatically in a very, very short space of time. So perhaps a good place to start is just to think about how would you summarize the state of regulation in the technology landscape today? And how do you see that changing as we go forwards?
Thanks for the question. I think that's a very good question, which summarizes a little bit what I'm doing at Qualcomm. So I do look after regulation, mainly in Europe. And I would say that we are facing an important momentum on the regulatory piece, but as well in terms of the mobile ecosystem in the industry. We have an important piece of regulation, which is called the Digital Markets Act. And this legislation adopted in Europe for the 27 countries has been adopted, and now it is the phase of implementation. And this is astonishing how things are shaking the market in Europe, and I think there is no better place to be than in Brussels to look at those changes right now.
Absolutely. You're at the heart of things, without a doubt. And I think, obviously the DMA has been absolutely central in terms of shaping what's happening globally. Could you, before we get into that, could we just talk a little bit from a Qualcomm perspective and perhaps your perspective specifically about how you see the impact of the DMA, what change that we're seeing manifesting itself in terms of the landscape and what that means for technology players and participants in the market, the ecosystem, as well as consumers?
So a lot in your question. Yeah. Maybe to start with a definition of what the DMA is trying to achieve. And the first thing is to bring back, I would say, fairness and contestability in the market. This is done through a kind of unique way of doing regulation, which is defining some obligations, so we call them the do's and don'ts. As an example, bringing interoperability as an example, or don't, like no self-preferencing. Yeah. You say what Audrey is talking about, but it makes sense, when I continue to explain. So this legislation is targeting, in fact, a very few numbers of companies. We call them the gatekeepers. 7 companies. I'm happy to give you the list. So we have the Alphabet, Amazon, Apple, and then we have ByteDance, Booking, and then we have the 2M, so Meta, and Microsoft. Yeah. So those 7 companies have to now respect this DMA in Europe, and this is targeting a number of services. So not everything that they are doing in terms of business, but just to name a few. So there are 8 categories. I'm not going to name the 8 categories, but like search as an example, or advertisement, or OS, or intermediation, video sharing. So those categories, are bound by categories and companies, and this is basically the framework of the DMA. What does it mean for the companies, I would say, targeted by the DMA and the one not targeted by the DMA? So the one targeted by the DMA, since March this year, they have to basically comply to the obligation. It's not happening in one day because it's quite heavy, but this is what they have to do. And what does it mean for the market? It means that it's going to bring a lot of level playing field for many players. If I give you one example, when I started to work on the DMA 5 years ago, the market was slightly different, of course. This market is evolving very rapidly, and Gen AI was not even a word or concept, and we didn't know about the companies that could emerge. Why I'm mentioning this is that because the market is evolving very, very rapidly. So what does it mean now is that those companies have to apply the law in Europe, And if they don't, there will be some kind of heavy fines.
So would you say then, Audrey, the Digital Markets Act is achieving its stated objectives based on what we've seen so far?
The short answer is yes. The longer answer is that it's still the beginning of the process. You know, the implementation is just starting, less than 6 months. So we need to wait a little bit to see I would say, the full-fledged of, you know, what the DMA can bring to the market. But there are some significant development that we are seeing already. And I have a few proof points that I wanted to share with you. On the internet browser, as an example, we've seen a peak in terms of additional users for Opera, as an example, and there is as well a group of companies providing, I would say, browser privacy enhanced capability that have seen similar trends. So that's okay. Already, you know, some numbers. On the app stores, which is, you know, something as well brand new with the DMA. Yeah. So right now we have a lineup of 5 companies ready, you know, to launch their app stores. And I believe as well that Microsoft has announced that, you know, they will be launching an app store this year. So again, another proof point. On an additional one that created some, I would say, scrutiny in the market, the payment option, you might recall that. Yes. So we have an announcement from like 100 developers developing gaming that want to change, you know, the features of payment. And there is a company in the UK which is called Curve, which announced that they would like to be like a competitor to Apple Wallet, as an example. So those are like concrete numbers that we are able to measure, and the analyst community could have a look at it. So those are the direct effect that we can measure. But there are others, like indirect effect. You might have heard about what is RCS standard, the Rich Communication Service. So very recently, a few months ago, Apple mentioned that for the release of iOS 18, this will be embedded. So for the not geek like me that don't know what is RCS, basically this is the evolution of SMS. And so this will bring, in fact, new features between, I would say, the Android users and the Apple users, which were, I would say, challenged by a number of technical roadblocks so far. So what's going to happen, I don't know yet exactly. I know that the announcement was for autumn, so this fall, so about to be launched. I know that on the beta version, this feature, which was released in June, has already been tested by a number of people. So, as well, you know, broader than the DMA. And to be specific on the DMA, in fact, this it was not an official obligation as to Apple, because iMessage was not considered yet as a CPS, but proactively, that's a new feature offered to European citizens. That's
a very good summary in a very short space of time. So, yeah, I mean, there's been a tremendous amount, without a doubt. If I play devil's advocate a little bit, the counter argument here is the DMA, the Digital Markets Act, is overreaching.
Yes.
It's impacting consumers negatively.
Yes.
And, you know, really it's making issues of areas that really aren't in consumer consciousness, and it's impacting competition.
Yes.
How would you respond to that?
I would say that's an interesting way to look at it. And I was discussing with an official yesterday from the European Commission at an event at the Parliament, and I'm going to use, you know, the example she gave, which I thought was very, very good. On AI as an example, she was saying it's a little bit like the old game of innovation versus regulation, meaning the Europeans are always, again, regulating more than they innovate. Yes. From my perception of what I see in the market, this is the wrong way to look at the market right now. And we are seeing now, especially with the development of AI, a lot of complementarity between regulation and innovation, and I would say even some synergies. So if some people, I would say people or companies, are not keen to release some features in Europe, well, you know,
yes,
others will do it.
Yes. But we'll leave it there. I know you
Yes.
don't want to get into specifics.
Yes.
One question then. We spoke with your colleague, Wasim Shabaji, and that was 3 years ago now. And we were talking in the very early days as the DMA was being defined about the potential for that to really become a blueprint globally,
Yes.
i.e. really have global significance rather than just impacting the European market. Is that taking place, do you think? Is that what we're seeing, given that obviously we haven't yet seen regulation in the US?
Yes.
We're seeing some developments in other markets, but it does seem to be having some wider significance. Keen to get your thoughts on that.
So that's I think, the next phase of the DMA. This is what I would qualify as the Brussels effect. Mm-hmm. And we've seen this Brussels effect, in fact, already having effect before we had the Digital Market Act enacted. So receiving a lot of questions from my peers from different parts of the world, what this is about, can you explain why, this is not dealt by antitrust, why do you use economic regulation? And what I can tell you, like concretely today, I am in London, if I'm not mistaken, the UK government has adopted a legislation which is, I would say, in the same spirit as the DMA, of course different because we have different legal system, yeah. But that's the same philosophy, and we are seeing this trend, in fact, across the world. To give you some example, Japan has adopted legislation, and Japan is now at the phase for the legislation to be in full motion by the end of 2025. So that takes time to move this. Yes. Korea is considering a bill as well. So clearly as well, there is a push in Asia, but not only. So we are seeing a number of consultation to the industry, a lot of debate in a number of forums. In India, as an example, in Australia, in Brazil, in Thailand. So clearly a lot of I would say countries are looking into this. And while I was preparing for the interview, I discovered yesterday by a law professor in Florence, podcast on DMA, that in fact even South Africa is considering maybe being influenced by this regulation. So clearly a massive impact across the world.
And it is significant. I mean, this was something that we've been talking about for a few years, in that the European market is large, it's substantial, yes. The requirements of the DMA are significant, and therefore the chances are it would have that global impact, and it's certainly happening in a very short space of time. We're seeing a huge amount of development in AI. It's moving at tremendous speed, and that creates enormous challenges when it comes to trying to get arms around regulation and what that needs to look like. What are your thoughts on this? What's realistic, do you think, in terms of the European market when it comes to AI and regulation? And how do we try and deliver something that's workable without negatively impacting innovation, whilst also ensuring that the guardrails are in place?
So, short answer, it is a challenge. A longer answer, first there is the AI regulation that has been adopted, and as Qualcomm, we signed the pact. So we are embracing this regulation, which is based on risk-based approach. Now we have as well the interaction of AI with the DMA, and on this there are some interesting development from a number of agencies that we think that could be interesting. So Autorité de la Concurrence, back in June in France, released a very interesting report on the interaction of AI and the DMA. And more recently as well, we have seen the high-level expert group on the DMA, which is a combination of a number of agencies in Europe, cultural, telecom, and I would say competition, saying that this market is very dynamic, and the agencies in Europe and the European Commission must watch carefully what is happening. One of the points of the statement, which is very interesting, which is bringing clarity in the market, is saying that, in fact, AI is already part of the DMA, not as a technology, as a core service, but in fact, when AI is embedded in some of the CPS, the core platform service, AI is already part of it. So we're going to see a number of development in the future. Similarly, there were very good information that we have seen information sharing between the DOJ, the European Commission and the CMA going in the exact same direction. So a lot to watch for the next prediction.
Yeah, huge amount to unpack and to unfold in the next few years. We look forward to having you back and following up soon. Audrey, thank you very much for joining us. It's been great.
Thanks, Geoff.
Qualcomm is changing the game, transforming the way we work, live, and communicate, driving advances in artificial intelligence, building a more intelligently connected future.